Welcome back to our discussion of the in-between markets, monopolistic competition and oligopoly. We just discussed monopolistic competition, so naturally that leaves us with oligopoly. An oligopoly, market structure that's pretty different than the others in terms of the assumptions we make. First, a few sellers. Not one, but not many. It could be two, could be six. I mean, we don't really put a formal definition on it, but we just say a few. Number two is an assumption that isn't really even an assumption. The reason, what does number two say? It's saying it could be absolutely any product, right? Could be identical or it could be different, which is not really saying much. The reason we put two in is every other market structure we've had something there that said either the product's identical or it's different or it's unique. This allows a little bit more of a side-by-side comparison if you wanted to look at what are these assumptions in all four market structures. You can see oligopoly basically says whatever. Doesn't matter what the product is. Point three, difficult market entry. Once again, this is a little different than the others. It's not easy like monopolistic competition and perfect competition, but it's not essentially impossible, which is what we say with monopoly. I mean, with monopoly, the barriers to entry, essentially entry isn't feasible. Oligopoly can happen. It's just tough, really tough. So a few sellers, what does that mean? Well, it means there's mutual interdependence. The actions of one firm are going to affect the other firms in the market. If Budweiser comes out with a great new brand of beer, then you would expect the other beer companies, Miller, Coors, any other beer company that kind of competes with Budweiser, they'll be affected. There is mutual interdependence in these markets. Same thing, if Toyota comes up with a great new car or a great new feature on their cars, that's going to affect the other cars. Or if they decide to lower their price, right, that's going to affect the other firms in the market. Often 3 to 5 firms, it can be 2. In game theory, actually, we study duopolies. So it can be 2 firms, could be more than 5, but not much more, right? We don't have many firms. Product could be identical or differentiated. Oil is an example of identical product. Automobiles, though, are more differentiated. And market entry is difficult, but not impossible. So the reason it's difficult, oligopolies typically enjoy economies of scale. So recall, this is now the 3rd time in the course we've heard of economies of scale. Once in the cost section, just describing what it was. But monopolies, if it's a natural monopoly, that exists because of economies of scale. And now in oligopolies. So economies of scale, I hope you know it, but in case you need refreshing, it's when as you produce more, the cost keeps dropping. Not the total cost, right? It still costs more if you're Microsoft to print one extra version of Windows. But that 50 cents they have to spend to print it and put it in a box is nothing compared to the $1 billion they spent to develop Windows. So every extra seller they get, their average cost drops. Same with electricity, right? I mean, electricity, it costs a lot of money to build a power plant, but it is basically free to get the next person power. Not quite, but close enough. To the point when each extra customer you add means the average cost drops. Well, when this happens, it'll be very difficult for others to profitably enter the market. Because right now Microsoft can spend $1 billion developing their software, and they know there's enough customers that the average cost per customer is pretty small. Well, what if a new firm wants to create an operating system? They may have to spend a whole lot of money, but they won't have that customer base, at least at first, to rely upon to spread the costs around. So it might be more costly per unit for a new firm to enter into the software market, automobile market, airplane market. It's tough to enter these markets. And we don't say impossible, so think back to airlines. What are some new airlines in the past 15 years or so? I don't know for sure. I hadn't heard of JetBlue until 5-10 years ago, maybe. Maybe it was even 5 years ago. I'm not certain if it's more than 10, 15 years old. That's one that's entered, right? Southwest entered in the early 70s, I believe it was. It's not easy, right? It's not like you see new airlines popping up all over the place. New cars, you don't see them popping up. Okay, you'll see a new car line, right? You might hear, wait, what about the Volt? Well, the Volt's a Chevy, so that's Chevrolet. That's not a new company. That's an old company. Right? In the past 20 years, I think Kia is relatively new. So, I mean, it can happen, right? You can come in, and it can happen. You just don't see it very often because it's difficult. So how are price and output determined then? With oligopolies, it's quite a bit different in the sense that we will not be, in this class, putting up demand and supply curves for oligopolies because there's so many other factors that affect the price and the quantity. What we will be doing is talking about some of these factors and how they matter. So non-price competition, right? Increased advertising, improved products. If you can come up with a slightly better product or convince people your product is slightly better, you'll get more customers. This explains why you see large expenditures on advertising and research and development. People think your product is better, they'll buy it, or if you do come up with a better product through your research and development, you should have an advantage over your competitors. Price leadership. Airline industry used to be a classic example of this, as one firm would decide, we're going to offer a discount on airline tickets from this time period. Everybody else then would do it as well. Why? Well, if one airline is saying there's a sale on these fares, if the others don't, they're going to lose a lot of business. So it's considered price leadership. One firm might set the prices, others would follow. Cartels can determine price and output. A thing to note, and I don't think I have it on the slide, but you will want to note, cartels are illegal in the United States and in most developed countries. Firms cannot legally do this, but some still might. A cartel is a group of firms that formally agree to control the price and output of a product. Many of you have probably heard of a drug cartel, not known necessarily what they're talking about. They're talking about this. Now, when we talk about firms, we're talking about like drug lords instead of what you might typically think of as a firm. But it's the same thing. These group of drug bosses will get together and say, okay, let's cut back on the production a little. Because we cut back on the production, we can charge a higher price. That's what a cartel wants to do. It is illegal in the U.S. When a cartel is in place, the firm's production decisions aren't independent anymore. So it's, you would get together and do this as a group. You and all the other drug bosses, if you're in the drug cartel or if you're in whatever other industry. You decide, let's all just cut back on our production just a little bit. And if you do that, then you can charge higher prices. They are tough to hold. And we're going to look at game theory. Game theory, one of the classic examples, the prisoner's dilemma game. You'll see why a cartel is tough to hold in place. There is an incentive for these firms to cheat on the rest of the group and produce just a little bit more. Because of that, you find the cartels are tough to hold to the agreement. One example of a cartel is OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Right? I said cartels are illegal in the U.S., right? Well, OPEC is not the U.S. This is various exporting countries that do try to hold back on the production of oil to charge a higher price. So cartels in the U.S. are illegal. Okay, we do have this point here. But it is important to know you may not form a cartel, and you can get in a lot of trouble if you try. There are several laws towards oligopolies and monopolies in the United States. Here's just a couple. The Sherman Act of 1890 makes forming a cartel illegal. More than that, though, if you let's say someday you own a restaurant and there's a restaurant across the street, and the restaurant across the street puts on their, special this week, our super burger is on sale. It would be illegal for you to go over and talk to the owner of that and say, wow, I noticed you put the Super Burger on sale. You have committed a crime by just saying that. You may not discuss prices in any shape or form with your competing firms if you're the owner of a firm. The reason it's kind of the slippery slope idea, once you bring it up, it's much easier to kind of weave into a way to conspire to set prices. You may not talk about prices at all with your competitors. If you do, you violate the Sherman Act of 1890, and you could be looking at prison time, and there have been plenty of people who have been put in prison for violating the Sherman Act. The Clayton Act of 1914, this defines damages. So if somebody does restrict trade, called treble damages, you could get 3 times the damages you sustained. Federal Trade Commission, 1914 invention, helps administer these laws. And then a couple more. The Robinson-Patman Act. This prohibits a buyer charging different people different prices if the result would reduce competition. Where I find that the company I like to mention when we bring this up is Walmart now. And Walmart is not in violation of the Robinson-Patman Act, but Walmart often uses its enormous purchasing power. They buy from sellers. So the sellers are selling to Walmart. And these companies will often sell to Walmart at a cheaper price. And Walmart will say, look, we'd love to buy from you, Kleenex company. What is that? Is that Procter & Gamble? Kimberly-Clark, I think. We'd love to buy Kleenex from you, Kimberly-Clark. But look, we have all of these stores. We're a massive client. You're going to lower the price for us a little bit. And Walmart's so powerful they can usually get lower prices. This would be illegal if it reduced competition. Reducing competition then you would see higher prices. Well, Walmart's whole their MO, so to speak, is that they have low prices, right? They do this, then they pass on the low prices. They make it very difficult for local firms to compete because the prices are so low. So they don't reduce competition, they increase competition. Because of that, they're not in violation of the Robinson-Patman Act. Charging buyers different prices if it reduced competition would be a violation. And then the final act, Seller-Kefauver Act, this deals with mergers, and mergers is incredibly complicated to figure out. You almost need to be an antitrust economist to know whether a merger is really going to reduce competition or not. But you see mergers from time to time in a lot of different industries. Recently, cell phone companies have discussed merging, like Sirius Satellite and XM, a high-profile potential merger case. Airlines have merged recently. Delta and Northwest merged, and now they're just all called Delta. I think United Airlines might be merged with U.S. Airlines in the past year or so. U.S. Airways, I think it's called. You see mergers all the time. If a merger would reduce competition, that merger won't be allowed. The issue that is really tricky for these antitrust lawyers is it better to have 5 huge firms or 4 huge firms and 2 small firms? Right? If the 2 small firms want to merge to form the 5th large firm, is that more or less competition? Honestly, when I see that 2 companies want to merge, I would not know initially, I wonder if that's a good thing, without doing an extensive amount of research. So this act is there. When you hear mergers and you hear, will it be legal or not, know that this is what they're talking about. Would it reduce competition? If it would, then it should be found illegal. If not, then it should go through. What can we say then, wrapping up our oligopoly section? Price will be higher than perfect competition. Oligopolies will spend a lot of money on advertising, product differentiation, research and development, all in a goal to shift the demand for their product. And oligopolists can earn profits. There are barriers to entry, which prevents other firms from jumping into the market if they see a profit-making opportunity. So oligopolists can indeed earn profits. Finally, a 2-firm oligopoly is called a duopoly. And the next section is game theory, which, and we really go through a very basic introduction of game theory, but it can be very useful in studying actions of duopolies, and that's what the next lessons will be covering.